I am a female, 22 years old. I've been working the night shift at a gas station on the outskirts of town for the past 3 years. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills. Plus, I've always enjoyed the quiet of the night and the solitude it brings. But one night, that solitude was shattered in a way I'll never forget. It was a typical Wednesday night, or rather, early Thursday morning. My shift had ended at 2 a.m., and I was driving home along the familiar deserted country road. The air was crisp, and the sky was clear, the moon casting a pale glow over the fields and trees. The only sounds were the hum of my car's engine and the occasional rustling of the wind through the branches. I had just passed the old abandoned farmhouse that always gave me the creeps when I noticed something strange. Up ahead on the side of the road there was a figure standing motionless. At first I thought it was a deer or some other animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. I slowed down, my heart beginning to race. The figure was tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It was hunched over, and its skin looked pale and stretched tight over its bones. As my headlights swept over it, the figure turned its head slowly to face me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Its eyes were hollow, sunken, and dark, and its mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth. It stared at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I couldn't look away, frozen by a mixture of fear and disbelief. The thing looked like something out of a nightmare. I snapped out of my trance and pressed the gas pedal, speeding past the figure. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see it following me, but there was nothing. The road behind me was empty. When I finally reached my apartment, I parked the car and sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I barely slept that night, and when morning came, I decided to drive back to the spot in daylight. Maybe I thought I would find some rational explanation. An animal carcass, a tree branch, something that would make sense of what I saw. As I drove back to the spot, the daylight revealed nothing unusual. The old farmhouse looked as abandoned and eerie as ever, but there was no sign of the figure from the night before. No tracks, no evidence that anything had been there at all. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Had it all been in my head? Was it just my imagination running wild after a long night shift? That evening, I mentioned the incident to an older co-worker, Jim, who had lived in the area his whole life. His reaction surprised me. He became very serious and leaned in close, speaking in a low voice. "You need to be careful out there," he said. "There are stories, old legends around here about creatures that roam the woods at night. They're not just tales to scare kids. My grandpa used to talk about them, the Wendigo. They say it's a spirit of hunger and despair, something you don't want to cross paths with." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard the term Wendigo before, but I had never taken those stories seriously. Now I wasn't so sure. I still work the night shift at the gas station, but I take a different route home now, avoiding the old farmhouse altogether. Every now and then I hear strange sounds in the distance or catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, and I'm reminded of that night. I'm a lot more cautious on my drives home now, always watching the road and the shadows beyond, just in case. I never believed in the supernatural or the paranormal. Growing up in a small town in Wisconsin, I was raised on logic and reason. My father, a science teacher, and my mother, a nurse, both instilled in me a strong sense of rationality. But an encounter from my childhood has always haunted me, despite my best efforts to dismiss it as a trick of the mind. It was the summer of 1998, and I was a kid. My best friend Mark and I spent most of our days exploring the outskirts of our town. There was an old, decrepit warehouse about a mile from my house where we loved to play. It was a relic from a bygone era, left to decay and filled with rusting machinery and broken windows. Our parents had forbidden us from going there, which only made it more alluring. One sweltering July afternoon, Mark and I decided to go to the warehouse. Armed with our flashlights and backpacks filled with snacks, we set off. The building loomed ahead of us, casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. As we approached, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside, eager for adventure. Inside, the air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the heat outside. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional creak of the structure settling and our own footsteps echoing off the walls. We wandered through the maze of rooms and hallways, imagining we were explorers in a forgotten land. After about an hour, we found a small room we hadn't seen before. The door was slightly ajar, and a strange smell wafted out, something metallic and rotten. My heart started to race, a sense of dread creeping over me. Mark, always braver than I was, pushed the door open further and stepped inside. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to turn back, but I couldn't leave him alone. The room was dark with only a sliver of light coming through a crack in the ceiling. As our eyes adjusted, we saw what appeared to be a large dark stain on the floor, and the smell grew stronger. Mark shone his flashlight around the room, and that's when we saw it, a figure hunched in the corner. What was most disturbing were its eyes, not just hollow, but as if they were pits of darkness that seemed to absorb all light. The face was gaunt and stretched tight, with a lipless mouth that revealed rows of long, uneven teeth, which looked more suited for tearing flesh than for any normal purpose. Its movements were unsettlingly smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking, and it emitted a low, continuous hum that seemed to resonate through the room. "Mark, we need to go," I whispered, my voice trembling, but Mark seemed rooted to the spot, his flashlight shaking in his hand. Suddenly the figure lurched forward, and instinct took over. I grabbed Mark's arm and yanked him towards the door. We ran as fast as we could, not daring to look back. The sound of our footsteps pounding against the concrete floor echoed in my ears, mingling with the frantic beating of my heart. We didn't stop running until we were outside, the bright sunlight blinding us for a moment. We collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath, and I realized I was shaking all over. Mark's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. What was that?" he stammered. "I don't know," I replied, trying to steady my voice, "but we're never going back there again." We never spoke of it after that day. Whenever we passed the warehouse, we would quicken our pace, avoiding each other's eyes. As we grew older, we drifted apart, and the memory of that day faded, buried under the weight of school, work, and life. But sometimes, late at night, I would find myself lying awake, the image of that figure creeping back into my mind. The rational part of me tried to explain it away, a trick of the light, a figment of our overactive imaginations. But deep down, I knew that what we saw was real, and the fear it inspired has stayed with me all these years, a reminder that there are things in this world that defy explanation. Now, as an adult, I still don't believe in ghosts or monsters, but I know there are things out there that can't be easily dismissed. That day in the warehouse showed me that sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't understand, and while I may never know what we encountered, I've learned to trust that feeling in my gut, that sense of unease that tells me when something isn't right. It's a lesson I carry with me, a small piece of my childhood that has shaped the man I've become. I didn't thought I'd be telling a story like this, but I have to get it out. It was just last winter, and my cousin Laura's wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives. Little did I know it would turn into something straight out of a nightmare. The reception was held at an old, charming lodge in the small town of Winter Haven, nestled deep in the woods. The place had a rustic charm with its wooden beams and stone fireplace, but the snowstorm outside gave it a foreboding edge. My cousin Laura was radiant in her wedding dress, and the evening was unfolding beautifully. My cousin Kevin and I had just grabbed another round of drinks when we decided to step outside for a bit of fresh air. "Man, this place is amazing," Kevin said, rubbing his hands together to keep warm. "Just look at that snow. Feels like we're in a fairy tale." "Yeah, except for the storm," I replied, glancing up at the thick snowflakes swirling in the wind. "Maybe we should head back in before we freeze." Kevin was about to agree when a distant, low howl cut through the wind. I looked at him, raising an eyebrow. "You hear that?" "Yeah," Kevin said, his breath coming out in white puffs. "Probably just the wind." We decided to investigate a bit, walking further from the lodge. The snow was deep, almost up to our knees, making every step a chore. The howl came again, closer this time, and something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Mike, I don't like this," Kevin said, his voice trembling slightly. "Let's head back." "Yeah, good idea," I agreed, starting to turn around when we heard a rustling sound behind us. We both froze, turning slowly to face the source of the noise. What we saw was beyond any description I can muster. Standing among the trees was a figure, tall and emaciated with long limbs and a gaunt face that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its eyes were a piercing, eerie glow that cut through the dark. "Mike, what the hell is that?" Kevin whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "How the hell would I know?" I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "But we need to get back to the lodge now." We turned to run, but the creature let out a chilling, bone-rattling scream that echoed through the forest. I could feel its presence following us, just beyond the edge of my vision. Every time I looked back, I couldn't see it, but the feeling of dread grew stronger. "Run faster!" I shouted, pushing Kevin ahead of me. We stumbled through the snow, desperate to get back to the safety of the lodge. Behind us, the creature's howl grew louder and more frantic, almost as if it was angry at our escape. We finally reached the lodge, slamming the door shut behind us. We were breathless and covered in snow, but safe for the moment. The guests inside looked at us in confusion and concern as we tried to explain what had happened. "Are you two okay?" Laura asked, her eyes wide as she took in our disheveled appearance. "We saw something out there," I said, trying to catch my breath. "It was like nothing I've ever seen, some kind of creature." Laura's eyes widened even further and she stared at us, her mouth slightly agape. "You're not kidding, are you?" she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I've heard stories, but I never thought—" She shook her head, clearly astonished. "This is unbelievable. I mean, I know there are old tales, but to see something like that right outside?" Laura's astonishment was palpable, her disbelief mingled with a sense of awe. "I don't know what to say. I think we should definitely make sure everyone stays inside and keep an eye out. I'll make some calls and see if we can get extra security or something." Her reaction, a mix of awe and disbelief, made the situation feel even more surreal. We spent the rest of the night uneasy but safe inside the lodge. The storm eventually cleared, and by morning there was no sign of the creature. It was as if it had never been there, but I know what I saw, and so does Kevin. That night, the beautiful wedding turned into a chilling reminder of how close we came to something truly horrific. I hope I never have to see anything like that again. It's hard to believe that something as ordinary as a summer camping trip could turn into a terrifying experience. But then, I guess that's what happens when you mix nostalgia with the unknown. Last summer, my friends and I decided to reunite for a camping trip in the old spot we used to visit during our school days. There were 5 of us: Rachel the planner, Tom the joker, Sam the quiet one, Lisa the worrywart, and me, Emily. We hadn't all been together like this in years, so the excitement was palpable. We arrived at the lake just as the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the water. The site looked just as we remembered it, picturesque, serene, and completely isolated. Setting up the tents and lighting the campfire was easy. It was the conversations that felt like a delicate dance between catching up and reminiscing. "Can you believe it's been 10 years since we last camped here?" Rachel said as she tossed another log onto the fire. "It feels like yesterday," Tom replied, his voice full of the kind of nostalgia only old friends can share. "Remember that time we got lost and had to follow the stars to find our way back?" "Yeah, and Sam nearly had a meltdown because he thought the stars were UFOs," Lisa added with a laugh. "Hey, I was just being cautious," Sam muttered, clearly still a bit defensive about that memory. The laughter and warmth of the fire created a cozy atmosphere, but I couldn't shake a lingering unease. The woods around us seemed darker than I remembered, and the way the wind rustled through the trees had an eerie undertone. I kept my fears to myself, not wanting to spoil the mood. As the night grew colder, we huddled closer to the fire, telling ghost stories and playing old games. At some point, Tom suggested a night hike. "Come on, let's explore the old trail. It's supposed to be a perfect night for it." "Are you serious?" Lisa's voice wavered. "It's already dark. We should stay here." "Oh, come on, Lisa," Tom said, rolling his eyes. "It'll be fun. Besides, we'll stick together. What could go wrong?" Reluctantly, we agreed and set off down the trail. The moonlight cast strange shadows through the trees, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot. The air was thick with anticipation, and I noticed how Sam, normally so quiet, seemed unusually tense. "Guys," Sam said, stopping abruptly, "I don't think this is a good idea." "Oh, come on, Sam," Tom said, his tone teasing, but with a hint of nervousness. "It's just the woods." But Sam's unease was contagious. The shadows seemed to grow darker, and the wind picked up, carrying a faint, unsettling howl that sent chills down my spine. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Hear what?" Rachel's voice was steady, but her eyes darted nervously around. "That howl," I said. "It sounded different." "Maybe it's just an animal," Lisa suggested, though her voice was barely more than a whisper. We pressed on, though I wished we hadn't. The howling grew louder, more persistent. It was almost as if it was following us. As we reached a small clearing, we found a spot where the trees seemed unnaturally sparse. "Let's take a break here," Tom suggested, though he was visibly agitated now. "Catch our breath and then head back." We sat in uneasy silence, the howling now a constant haunting presence in the background. Suddenly the wind picked up, and the howling turned into a horrifying scream. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, an inhuman, piercing cry that made the air feel heavy and oppressive. "Let's go," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "We need to get back." As we scrambled to our feet, the darkness seemed to close in around us. I could see the fear in my friends' faces, and my own heart was pounding in my chest. We tried to retrace our steps, but the forest had changed. The trail we knew so well was now a confusing maze of twisted trees and unfamiliar terrain. "Stay close," Tom shouted, his voice breaking. "Don't wander off." But even as we tried to stick together, something felt terribly wrong. The howling was now a cacophony of tortured cries, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. It was then that I noticed Sam was missing. "Sam," I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. "Sam, where are you?" There was no response, only the relentless, haunting scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. We searched frantically, calling his name, but he was gone. It felt like we were being watched by something malevolent. We finally made it back to camp, but the comfort of the fire did little to ease the terror we felt. We spent the night in a state of fear, huddled together, and the next day we reported Sam missing. The authorities conducted a search, but there was no sign of him, just more eerie howls, and the unsettling feeling that something had been waiting for us in the woods. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that we were not alone that night. The forest seemed to have a darkness that wasn't there before, and sometimes when the wind howls through the trees, I wonder if Sam saw something he shouldn't have, something that kept him from coming back. We never found him, and the forest remains a place of haunted memories. Every time I close my eyes, I can still hear that terrible howl, a reminder of the night our reunion turned into a nightmare. It was around 2 a.m. when my girlfriend and I decided to make a late-night run to McDonald's. We had been craving something familiar, something that could anchor us to ordinary moments in an otherwise restless week. The city outside was wrapped in a velvet cloak of darkness, with only the soft hum of distant traffic breaking the silence. We pulled into the drive-thru, our voices echoing in the stillness as we placed our order. The golden arches illuminated the parking lot, casting a warm, inviting glow that felt like a beacon of normalcy. We enjoyed our meal inside the car, the food and our laughter acting as a temporary balm for our weary souls. It was one of those simple, perfect moments, sharing fries and giggles, with the world outside feeling distant and irrelevant. As we finished and headed back, the city's lights faded behind us, giving way to the darkness of the suburban streets. My girlfriend, exhausted, had drifted off, her head resting softly against the window. Her even breathing was a comfort, a gentle reminder of the mundane joy we had just shared. That's when I saw it. Just as I was about to turn onto our street, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. My heart jumped into my throat as I slammed on the brakes. The headlights caught a tall, emaciated figure that seemed to flicker and distort like an illusion. Its eyes were a disturbing, otherworldly glow, an unsettling, predatory light that cut through the darkness. The creature's face was a horrifying mask of hunger and despair, twisted into an expression that seemed to scream silently at us. I felt paralyzed, unable to look away, as if the sheer presence of it had hijacked my senses. My hands shook uncontrollably on the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, frantic bursts. After what seemed like an eternity, the figure slowly turned and vanished into the night, its movements grotesque and unnatural. I stared at the empty road, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My gaze drifted to my girlfriend still peacefully asleep beside me, oblivious to the nightmare that had unfolded. I drove the rest of the way home in a daze, every shadow and noise intensifying my anxiety. Our neighborhood, normally so familiar, now felt like an eerie reminder of what lay beyond its borders. I parked the car and we stumbled inside, my mind still reeling from what I had witnessed. Lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling, the terror of that creature lingering in the darkness of my thoughts. I felt a deep, unsettling dread, as if the night had revealed a darker, more primal truth about the world. And as my girlfriend slept soundly, unaware of the horror I had seen, I was left grappling with a fear that defied explanation and a silence that felt both heavy and ominous. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a comment below. Your feedback helps me create more content you'll love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more updates. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a comment below. Your feedback helps me create more content you'll love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more updates. See you in the next video.